I want to thank you very much for your two presentations. It was very interesting for the industry to see where you are. We see interesting, you can say, point that was presented by you, Yoshuhiro, about, can say, some discussion that we have this morning about, can say, this summary aspect, also the split about what is a regulatory commitment and what is a supportive information, some challenge about the post-approval, that is another questions. I see a lot of things, very good things also in your presentation that we appreciate that, Christine. What is also important is to see as an industry is we recognize that all the agency, the big agency that you are representing here, are focused to the interest of the patient. That's the main focus. My question, which will be provocative, what are the value for the patient to have a different approach in the three different regions? That is something that we need to keep in mind. I just want to remind a point that was shared recently by Fernand Soher. We have starting, you can say, the EMA, which we are today. When they start the EMA, they decide to start in the same time the ICH process, because they believe if we succeed to have a joint approach in Europe, it will be interesting to make sure that we globally are the same approach. And I think that probably the industry, which is what we are looking for, is this kind of convergence. The convergence is looked by process, by structure like ICH, which is at the end a very important structure for us. Is also the practical things. You say today, I appreciate that you say that, the practical exchange between the people, and we know that both of you was involved in the ICH process like me, and we know that the exchange between the people and the understanding is so one of the key elements to move forward. That's why I believe that we need to keep that in mind through the different processes that you have mentioned, you know, the joint assessment and these kind of things, and the industry will keep this convergence approach, because at the end, that's where the patient will benefit. That might just, you can say, an opening question, Jean-Louis.
Okay, thank you very much, Georges, for these words. I think I can only agree to what you have said. Nothing to add, actually, to what has been said so far. Only that because we had a lot of EU perspective these 2 days, just as a summary of what has been discussed so far this morning, since there's still a lot to do. Not quite sure how this will be structured, but for sure we will have a follow-up, and maybe David and Keith will already give our certain direction where we have to go, but for sure we will have to do something. And also from EU perspective, of course, we have also 27 or 28 member states. So for us, harmonization is also that we have to harmonize in our own garden before we... It's for sure also that some of the topics which have been discussed so far will also be taken over at an ICH level. I'm not quite sure at which priorities, but for sure, and we will have a first teleconference next Monday, where hopefully we will know more where we are going in the next future. But of course, all these topics and priorities will have to be agreed by the steering committee. So, questions? One.
Hi, Jean-Louis. I don't really have a question. I think it's been very fascinating to have the perspectives from PMDA through Hatsura-san and from Christine from the FDA. I'm encouraged that there's a lot of good thinking across the regional regulatory agencies. I still think there's possibilities for some in further harmonization and best practices to come out from that. But actually, I'm always encouraged by, as Christine said, the openness, candidness, and transparency of the discussions. This has been a very good process to get to today. There are actions to come, but actually, I think the real benefit is the closer we get to the discussions, the better the outcomes are. Because I think those of us who benefited from going through the workshop preparations with the regulatory partners, that's when really we've done the best of the discussion, very close in. But thank you for giving me a chance to speak. That's very kind.
I would not allow myself not to allow you to speak. Dora.
I just have a question to Christine. The idea to have the experts review the corresponding part is excellent. I was wondering, is there going to be someone to have an overview? You know, like, okay, someone can say, okay, I'm looking the PAT part, but if I look the PAT part without its relation to what is the design space and what's the overall control strategy, how do I make, is there a possibility I'm going to miss a few things?
One of the things, the question is, how are we going to make sure that all the reviews fit together? Well, we will be expecting our people to actually work together as teams, but we also recognize that we will need someone to coordinate the teams that has a scientific background, and especially to look for, as you mentioned, gaps, but also areas of overlap and conflict. So we're designing that into our process. We're not quite certain all the details yet, but that's part of our work in progress.
This is excellent, actually, as well.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Tom Hansen from Vertex. Very interested that Matsuda-san's presentation, you gave 3 classifications of changes, partial change, minor change, no change. Christine, in one of your slides, I don't recall exactly where it was, but you used the word key. And at the risk of opening up a can of worms, to the entire group, is there a possibility that QBD in general is going to move to a 3-tier classification rather than the 2-tier classification that we have now? And I will also note that in the past, Vertex has been extremely unsuccessful in using the term key. I think other people have as well.
Problem is, which I just can intervene here. Problem with the key is that it is defined differently in all the different applications, and seen by different companies, and this makes it difficult for us.
That absolutely is a problem in terms of our communication, in terms of our knowledge management as well. I think many of us here, myself included, see the next steps forward with QBD is tying in our risk assessments into post-approval change definitions. What that will actually look like, I can't say, but I have some ideas what it could look like. But anyway, what it will actually look like, I don't know. And so maybe we might find something useful. I mean, if you look at FDA change regulations, there's 3 tiered categories. There's prior approval supplements which are required for products that have a high potential, for changes that have a high potential to affect product quality. There's CBEs or CBE30s, which have I'm sorry, it's not a high potential, it's significant. CBEs, CBE30s, which is a moderate potential to affect product quality, and then annual report, which has a minimal potential to affect product quality. So, maybe as we develop this further, it might work out that way. I can't say.
Yes, David.
David Tenge, GSK. Christine, I was interested in your comment, put patients first by balancing risk and availability. And with the breakthrough designations coming through, and a number of companies clearly have got an interest in this space, just wondering what your own thoughts were on the challenges and opportunities that will bring.
So the breakthrough therapy, that's a different talk. But, really, I think that the centerpiece about it is to say we recognize that for many of these breakthrough therapies that we will have less than the standard package of information at the time of submission. We're absolutely looking to work with the companies to be flexible on certain aspects, but at the end of the day, it's going to be an assessment of what are the risks to quality because we don't have all the information, the potential risks versus the risk of not having that medicine available to the patient. And it's definitely a case-by-case decision or decision making, because not all the risks to patient availability are the same, but based on what the indication is, what the other, therapies are, and not all the risks of quality are the same based on the dosage form and the failure modes of that particular dosage form. It will take a careful assessment in collaboration with the clinical division, for some of the more challenging issues.
Regarding case-by-case decision or case-by-case approach, or it was an interesting discussion this morning. I think it was with regard to parallel testing that we could not fix how much. To some extent, I like it. That would also mean that for the same company or different products, we might agree to something and then agree to more batches for another product. So this is something which also you will have, industry will have to have in mind if you go on case-by-case basis, because it will very much depend about the knowledge. But then, dear colleagues from industry, don't ask never again a number, okay? Because otherwise we go back and speak about the number of validation batches, which everybody like, and so if we go into this direction, this is fine, but then you have to acknowledge that it is not necessarily always predictable, because it will always depend. Of course, it will be done in the dialogue. We will propose, that's all fair enough. But then you have also to acknowledge that you might get different decisions depending on the product. This is something which you have to keep in mind. Øyvind.
Yes, normally the benefit-risk discussion is based on on safety and efficacy, whereas quality is normally not included in that balance. But it is so. Is this different? What you said, Christine, that you should include quality into the benefit-risk?
So Øyvind, what the breakthrough designation in FDA is, it's a very new pathway, and what it's allowing is for applicants to submit their application with very little clinical data. And because they're doing it much earlier in their development process, they're likely going to have less manufacturing data. And that could be less experience at a commercial scale. It could be less stability data. And those are the kind of different considerations that we do for an application that doesn't have, an urgent medical need. So yeah, I do think the considerations are different. Although, granted, I'm not quite certain how Europe does that. From the CMC perspective, the questions in that balance that we're doing really is not much different than what we currently do for many of our accelerated review drugs, oncology drugs, other life-threatening diseases, which may have a little bit more of a CMC package when they come in, but oftentimes do not have what, our typical expectations would be.
Yes, Ron.
I'm sorry, Jean-Louis, I do have a question now, a comment more so. It's this one about teasing about numbers, which I think is really interesting. I can see you smiling already. I think industry probably thinks that there is value in having some numbers. And what is really good in Q8 and 11 is that there's kind of a baseline expectation in place. So a baseline number can sometimes be a useful thing. Provided there's an understanding that if you provide some additional justification and rationalization, you might be able to come in under that number with that enhancement. Yeah. You knew I was going to say that because we talked about it as starting materials and step numbering, but we can't have, and I'm not saying you do, but we can't have closed positions if we're going to try and find the optimal outcomes. Apologies for coming back on you.
Well, I'm not quite sure. I don't know how to say it because I'm on the other side, so I'm more from the regulators, because regulators can be very imaginative, so we have to pay attention. And that's also what would be my example. Why not having 6 steps for the API starting materials? That would probably everybody would be unhappy, even regulators, but it would probably save a lot of discussion.
Yeah,
so,
and maybe a workshop.
And how many days? So I think we should leave this dangers of it's too dangerous to speak about numbers. Just wanted to add something about quality in relation to safety and efficacy. I remember when I started my career, that was at that time we had even Benelux registrations in Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and the idea there was that quality had a high standard at that time, of course, because clinical, non-clinical, and clinical was not so developed, and so quality had a rather high standard at that time. And the basic idea was always that, to a certain extent, quality is predictable. That means you can have, you have a good quality product on the market, and then but what is rather unpredictable is often non-clinical, is often clinical. The patient is unpredictable. So why not keep this really under control? What we can have under control, and this is really the pharmaceutical part. So you think about it. I think it's worthwhile also that we fight for having good quality and so on. And also I'm sometimes challenged, I have to admit, at CHMP level. But really, I think the pharmaceutical part is really something predictable. So let's keep it like this, and don't add another unknown to the unknown of the patient, unknown of non-clinical studies or even clinical studies. Because a medicine product, when it comes in the field, then you distribute it not that left clinical studies. You often do not know what will happen. And it will be always very difficult anyhow to make a link between if now a pharmacovigilance issue has come because it was misuse or because of quality effect. That's just a small message which I wanted to give you. Other questions? Yes, Gert.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to the numbers, but actually I want to agree with you because I think, yeah, I know you're smiling, me too. And I should let Dora comment as well. But what you said about these models and the number of, let's call it parallel testing, so I think it's fully appropriate that for a different product and a different model, there's a different way to verify that. I think there would be probably, at least from the technical side, no objection to that. There have been, in my past life, different models in use, and they all have slightly different control. They don't have much parallel testing, but they have different control mechanisms for the model. So I think that's actually fairly appropriate. Of course, at minimum, I would ask that for the same product, with two different assessors and inspectors, you will get the same number. But I think that is just and it doesn't make it easy because in a way, everybody likes like a fixed number, the same number is something to plan for. But I think the realities of these models are that they do pose different risks, all the way from what do we actually control, is the end product testing or not, how many batches. So it's quite, I think, appropriate if different products, we would get different control mechanisms. So I want to invite Dora, see if she agrees with me on that.
I do agree. I do agree because there is not one size fits all on anything, especially modeling that it is empirical modeling. There is, and I think there is a risk assessment associated with everything.
Well, I see that's just a fair comment. On the other hand, then just wanted to warn you because it's not that we got sometimes a remark, well, last time you agreed to this number, this time you agreed to another number. That you will get different numbers from different assessors, this will be, this we have to acknowledge. Because although assessors see it maybe from a different perspective, they maybe lie more importance on one aspect than on another, and I'm sure that within industry you are also not, within your company, not necessarily all on the same line. Okay. Yes.
Hi, it's David Holt from AstraZeneca. Just wanted to ask a question. I think it's related to what's been discussed over the last couple of days, really, around clarity of regulatory commitments and efficient and effective post-approval change. Just wanted to ask a question about whether the EMA or FDA have considered adopting a similar framework to what's in place in Japan around the application form.
So from the FDA standpoint, we're just kind of starting talks on, what would regulatory commitments mean? How might we implement them? Now, I'm not a regulatory lawyer, but when I read through the CFRs, I'm not quite certain how they fit in or what the interpretation is. So I think there'll be a lot of discussion on what we want to do, and then once we decide that, how we can do it.
Clarification, what do you mean by commitment now?
That's a question too.
I guess from an industry perspective, it's having clarity about what we need to do through the life cycle in terms of managing those commitments and making sure we're in compliance with what we're trying to achieve with our manufacturing processes, analytical methods, etc.
Yes, I take your point. I'm not quite sure that I can give you an answer at that stage, but it might be. Well, the commitments are basically in the marketing authorization, I would say. But you will need more harmonization between. I think problem also of harmonization is that we have different legislation between the different regions. This is also something which it makes it not necessarily easy to harmonize.
What I'd like to add on to what Jean-Louis is saying is that right now we do, both FDA and EMA have a regulatory mechanism in place that you can kind of define your own regulatory commitments in terms of protocols. So, you know, I'd like you to walk away thinking about that at least, to say, how could I use this mechanism, this regulatory mechanism that is in place to put together something that makes sense from a science and risk perspective?